So we'll just go ahead, we'll kind of kick it off here. This is an exciting topic for me. So I spent some time in manufacturing, and in that time I was, the exposure you get to some of the really fun military, aerospace applications, med device obviously. When you're talking about things here in the Twin Cities, it was a lot of fun, and during my time in that space, that's where I kind of got connected with Tom and some of the cool things Kablooey does, and he connected me with Bob, and I've known Jim for a while here now with Club E, so we're anticipating a really good discussion today. So, as we kick off, the idea really is, so you have a great concept, and you have a great product, maybe existing. The idea is, how do you take it to the next level? Why do so many products fail over time? So we're really trying to answer that question today. So I'll kick it off starting with Tom. So Tom, when you see all these people coming to you throughout all your history at Kablooey, if you could kind of summarize, what do you see from companies that make things work versus that don't? What's kind of one of those differentiating factors?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're a consulting firm, and so we're working with small startup companies that have some sort of a device concept that they're developing of some sort. And like you were talking about, a lot of it's medical in this arena, but not all of it. But yeah, so people come with all kinds of different ideas. They come with, you may have a product or a device at a different stage that you want to bring to a certain stage of development. And I think one of the biggest reasons why most of them fail, because you're right, a lot of them never make it beyond a short period of time and they die. And one of the biggest reasons really is the lack of vision of the correct exit strategy and what it's going to take to get to that exit strategy. So we've got some exit strategy experts in the room here, but oftentimes people will have a great technology. They'll come with an idea and it's like, oh, I've got a great device. It works new, no other device is working this way. And they want to pour a ton of money into developing it to make sure it works. And so they would come to somebody like us and say, hey, let's develop and we could do that. We'd say, sure, we could do that. But we try to ask them the question, well, have you thought about, the environment that this thing is going to live in? And who's going to use it and what's the cost of it? And, have you thought about what your eventual return on investment is going to look like once you get into manufacturing, what your margin is going to be, and who would actually be interested in acquiring this business if you think your exit strategy is an acquisition by a large manufacturer. And so much of the time, they haven't thought of any of that. They've just thought, this is really cool and no one else is doing it, so if I make a better mousetrap, somebody's going to want to buy it. And that is just not the case. You can make a better mousetrap, but there's a good chance nobody wants it, and it's going to go nowhere. And so it's that lack of foresight, I think, that's one of the biggest killers to a good idea.
Great. So I'm going to take that same baton, I'm going to pass it to Rick now. So let's go into the assumption that we have a really good mousetrap, and it is well designed, and it has a good vision. How do we get money to fund the project? So Rick, what do you see as being some of the things we need to be mindful of?
Sure. So framing up the question of either how do I look at something or other investors look at something, and then also kind of a checklist for yourself to say, all right, I've checked these boxes. First thing would be how you tell your story, and that's kind of two different parts of that would be, how do you show up here, and can you articulate what you're trying to do in short order with enough kind of meat on the bone so that somebody says, well, gee, that's interesting, tell me more. So do you kind of pass that hurdle of creating some intrigue on the investor's perspective? Second one part of that would be your materials, and then they say, okay, tell me more, send me your deck, send me your executive summary, how does that hold up? And the two kind of templates I really like, Guy Kawasaki has a format 10-20-30, a lot of stuff online, you can look for that. And then there's a group called SlideBean that helps package up presentations and improve them, and you can look for the SlideBean version of the Airbnb deck where they took the original one and spruced it up. So are you telling your story, and do you have the right materials? Second one is the appropriate risk-adjusted valuation and terms. So just over cocktail chatter, I could say, hey, that sounds interesting, tell me more. You tell me more, and I'd say, well, hey, what's the valuation? You give me a valuation, and I'm kind of running through my head, all right, you're chasing an addressable market that's so big, going to make some assumptions about garnering a certain portion of that, and then I can kind of backfill into, does that valuation make some sense? And the best way I can tell you about that to think about is in your neighborhood, houses sell for whatever, say $300,000, and if one of your neighbors said, hey, I think my house is worth $500,000, you immediately tell yourself, not gonna be able to sell it there. So what's the adjusted valuation and terms relative to the risk? Third thing, emotionally engaging and marketable story. You have to be able to hook somebody. Got some marketing experts down there nodding, and it's not just about the numbers and does it work. In fact, it's more about the emotionally engaging story, but you need the checkbox on the numbers. So is your story engaging? Because people make buy decisions on the emotion and then they backfill on the facts. Fourth thing, I wrote originally domain experts, which is very valuable. Do you know the market you're in? Because if I know the market more than you do, or I know more about how big it is, or I start answering these questions, that's not going to fly. So are you a domain expert? But what's interesting about that is sometimes if you go 180 degrees from a domain expert and they come at a market with a fresh set of eyes, sometimes they can see a better mousetrap because they're not stuck in the industry. Fundable team, and you say, all right, well, what does that exactly mean? And what I wrote here was just how confident are they going to make people feel to back them? So do their backgrounds, do their experiences, how they get along, all that stuff, does that create confidence in an investor? I have 10, we're on number 6, trying to fill the time slot that I was given by Rob. I also tried to put it in a list, so if somebody was taking notes, okay, we got the list with the check boxes, but we do have the wonderful video that you can see online, clube.com. All right, so what's your why? The Simon Sinek Start With Why. For anybody who hasn't read Simon Sinek, that's a must read. So what's the why of an organization? The financial risk, Rob, when you started, in the original question was why do companies fail? The first thing I put there was funding. So managing the financial risk, both to get up and running, but then the ongoing stuff. So maybe you have enough money to create this better mousetrap, but then you got 2 years of negative cash flows. I see somebody at the table back there nodding their head because we just talked about that about 48 hours ago. All right, is it a must-have versus a nice-to-have? There's a lot of products that are kind of cool, but would that cause somebody to reach into their pocket? So Hurt Locker is a great analogy. I mean, if you're selling bomb suits, people that are detonating bombs need your bomb suit. So just trying to position your product or thinking about your product as a must-have versus a nice-to-have. Number 9, market traction. Old saying, are the dogs eating the dog food? And it doesn't have to be sales. It could be pre-orders. It could be betas. It could be people that have raised their hand digitally saying, hey, if you build this, I'm interested. So what kind of traction or validation, and we heard that over here from Tom, is a lot of people forge ahead and haven't really gotten that initial validation. Last but not least, product and service that users love. You want people, hopefully, that can be brand ambassadors or evangelists for you, especially in the early stage when you don't have enough money to sell it, you don't have enough money to market it, you don't have enough money to do a lot of different things. So if you get people selling the benefits of what you're doing for yourself. So anyway, I came up with 10 things as to, I guess, a way for me to look at it, but also a checklist for yourself.
Very good, very good. So Bob, so we get the funding. We have a good design. How the heck do we tell our story? To Rick's point, so why don't you go over a little bit from the marketing side?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rick, you hit on the absolute critical function that we always talk about is emotional. Emotional is number one. Emotional message connecting to them needs to be simple. We like to say emotional, simple, and remarkable. So from an emotional perspective, when you're trying to connect, a lot of times we see this mostly, I'll say first-time entrepreneurs going out there because they're so excited about their product. They design, they put all their heart and soul, features, benefits, and it's all they want to talk about. And all they do is pound all this message. We deal a lot in medical as well. It's like all these features, benefits, and it's like nobody cares until they have a reason to care. And that's the connection from emotional. You have to understand that. And so you're not approaching them from kind of that rational brain in the front of their head. You're hitting them from that emotional spot in the back of the head. And then once they have a reason to care, now you go into more of the logic-based things of what they want to know about. So it's the way you approach it. And it is so difficult for a lot of people to think that way, but that's absolutely the way you do it. Combined with that, it has to be simple. It cannot be a complex message. It cannot be multiple messages. You have to understand the place you want to go into the brain that you're going to own as an organization, or that product is. Typically that's called positioning of where you're going to go, and then everything that you do has to hit that spot, right? And then, as Rick said, you backfill the logic. Last part, remarkable. In today's world, think of all the different ways we communicate it. Even probably how you even just learned about this event. I'm sure people learned about this event through many different channels, not just one. So, and you got to think about when you're creating experiences for people, what's going to be maybe that one big signature thing, right? Because people are going to tell other people about your product. It's no longer just this one-way directional communication, right? So can it be a unique experience at a trade show that you make that's kind of your signature element, something people are going to talk about post-experience? Is it maybe, a lot of times it could be a unique digital experience. We've done this a lot with our clients, like you're selling to the microsite, but what's going to be on there? Is it something unique, special they're going to do? How are they going to interact? Because what you want is, oh man, did you see, let me send you this thing. Boy, if you get that happening, now you get that trusted person to tell somebody else about your product. By the way, you just sold it. You didn't have to do anything from a sales perspective. So I think if you do those elements from a communications, and that's kind of those are kind of our pillars of how we always think about this, of what you need to deliver. So emotional, simple, remarkable.
Good. I like the simple part. It resonates well with me.
Simple is hard.
Yeah, it
right?
is.
Simple is very, very hard, especially when you're selling a complex medical device.
Yep. I would say even there was a retailer here in town, I won't name names, but they went through that metamorphosis over time to being very complex and drawing it down to be very simple. So totally get it. Yep. Jim, so we have this great idea. It's well designed, funded, marketing well, but how the heck do we protect it? How do we take this widget, this mousetrap that we have, and make sure that no one else can build a better mousetrap?
Yeah, well, so much for the idea of simple. As an attorney working with businesses, I view it my job to keep them from screwing up. Not that they listen to me all the time. And when it comes to new ideas, new devices, new entrepreneurial ventures, there is a lot of intellectual property issues associated with whatever people are trying to do. Now, you'll notice that the conversation so far has highlighted the importance of having good professional advisors, ranging from financiers to advisors on marketability, marketing, and everything else. Well, what you're doing is you're having to share your ideas. So think in terms of a device that you've invented, think of an idea you have for a better way to deliver a service. Whatever it is you're offering has elements of intellectual property associated with it, and you're sharing it with other people. Now you have to do that because you need the expertise, you need the resources that others have to take whatever it is you're offering and do something with. But the moment you share it with anybody, you are doing two things. You're putting something into the marketplace that conceptually, well, it is going to be discovered. People are going to see it. If there's any merit to it whatsoever, if you do anything with the product and it has any potential whatsoever, you will be sharing information about it. And that creates the risk of somebody seeing your better mousetrap and thinking, I can make this even better and turn it into a rat trap. Or, I think I can steal this idea and market it in a different way and make $1 million. And we've run into this exact kind of thing happening all too often. So let me bore you by talking about intellectual property and kind of the core levels that you have to look at when you're trying to protect your rights to intellectual property. Intellectual property is anything that relates to a concept, a design, a mechanism, a plan, any kind of business method, the way you do something. It's an incredibly broad arena. It used to be very simple. Widgets were subject to patents. names were subject to trademark, and that was about it. But the world has changed, and every one of us is dealing with our own and with other people's intellectual property every day in everything that we do. Now, we still look at intellectual property and trying to protect it in different ways depending on the nature of the property. So, two categories. One, legal. I'll get that out of the way first because you'll probably be bored with that, and you're still paying attention. The other is on the practical level, and that actually gets to be more interesting. So let me use an example that has stuck with me for years and years and years. I have a good friend who made a very nice living selling marketing ideas to Fortune 500 companies who sold to consumers. So anytime you see an end cap in a grocery store or a Target or something like that, you can be sure, I learned a lot from this guy, you can be sure that there is a marketing plan that whoever it is, Unilever, whoever makes toilet paper, there's a marketing plan that gave the retailer an incentive to put the product in that good place. He put these plans together. So he made a living going around to the president of marketing and selling an idea, an incentive program that would lead the retailers to do the things that needed to be done to move cases of consumer products. So he was often meeting with the head of a marketing company with, a bunch of minions standing around, and there were times when he got applauded, got a nice contract to do the work and implement the thing, and there were times that I'll call him the vice president of marketing, was so impressed that the moment my friend left, he turned to his minions and said, "That was a heck of a good idea. Why didn't you think of it? Go do it." So the intellectual property that is what my friend had to sell was so impressive that somebody stole it. So what do we do with that? So first, and I'll use that as the example throughout here. So first, look at the legal side. If it used to be in the old days that you had to have a tangible thing that would manipulate matter in order to have a patent, those days are gone. Business methods, a lot of concepts, designs, ideas can now be subject to patent protection. I'm not a patent attorney. It's incredibly specialized, incredibly expensive, but if you've got a really good idea, a really good product, or a really good set of mechanisms to provide services, visiting early on with a patent attorney is a heck of a good idea. They usually don't do free consultations, I'm sorry to say, because they tend to be expensive, but if it's a patentable item, a patentable piece of information or design, you need to be exploring it. And you need to do that early on for a couple of reasons. One is, again, as soon as you start sharing it, it gets out into the public eye. And the United States has a very limited time period after an idea becomes semi-public in order to file a patent. If you wait too long, it's considered to be in the public domain. And it doesn't take a lot to trigger that initial, consider it public showing. Worse than that is virtually all other countries in the world that recognize patents require a filing before an idea gets out in public in those countries. So that can be a little tricky. Hard to believe sometimes, but Canada is a foreign country, and we're kind of close to Canada, so it doesn't take a lot for something we come up with to be considered in the public domain up across our northern border. So keep that item in mind. Entrepreneurs, either maybe with the help of the marketing advisor, is going to come up with a brand, some kind of identifying mark that has attractiveness to the audience, that people will remember. It's called a trademark or a service mark. Trademarks are the mark that attaches to goods. Service marks are the protection that we try to attach to the name for a set of services that we provide. There are certain rights that arise simply from using. You'll probably see on billboards or in announcements or something a little TM up by a marketing name, SM for services. That's simply a public statement by whoever put that out there that I'm claiming rights to this name, this brand, this product name, this service name. Common law rights are real. They're very nebulous. They're awfully hard to enforce. If somebody else comes along and claims you're infringing on theirs or vice versa, who used it first? Are there any damages? It gets difficult. Actually filing a trademark is definitely the gold standard. They can be filed either on the basis of actual use or by filing in advance of starting to use. It's called an intent to use application. Big companies will often do that. They have a great idea. They have a tentative name. They want to kind of see if there's any problems out there with it or sort of reserve the name. So they file for a trademark based on intent to use. They can keep that alive for up to 3 years, which makes it difficult if one of us wants to use a similar name. But again, talking to counsel early on and seeing what kind of mark protection is appropriate and doable is a heck of a good idea. And last but not least is a very misunderstood concept of copyright. You all know when we pick up a book and we look inside the cover, there's some real tiny fine print that talks about this book is a work of fiction, it's protected by the Copyright Act and other things. Any creative work, not just written words, constitutes copyrightable material. So the video that you make to put on the website to show how your product works, the summary of your services that Rick helps you with and he's considering, in part of connection with financing, that's all a creative work. Art, videography, recordings, music, printed words, the videotapes that are being made of this presentation, that's all copyrightable material. And again, copyright is this concept, you have to claim it or you don't have it. So, in the bottom of a brochure that you might have out, the little C in a circle, 2020, Smith Industries, Inc., all rights reserved. That's a public announcement that the content of that brochure or the video that is attached to is protected by the Copyright Act. We can file copyrights. You don't have to in order to claim the copyright protection. There are some advantages to filing, including I won't waste your time on that, but there are some technical advantages that come from filing a copyrightable work with the Copyright Office, but you don't have to do it, you do have to claim it. So that's the legal side. Kind of boring, but at least I got the basic concepts out there for you. Now here's the practical side, and I go back to my friend with his pitches for his marketing services. He's talking to a group of people, and he's sharing an idea. How does he protect that? Well, his written materials, you can put the copyright notice on, right? But he was using PowerPoints, he was using video. That gets a little harder. Where I came down with him, and we talked about this at some length, what I came down to was a combination of protective, almost contract-like approaches to preserving his ideas and protecting his rights to them. So on the portfolio that's handed out, he had a disclaimer at the very front. This is the valuable proprietary information constitutes a trade secret. You're not authorized to use this information except in connection with assessing what I am offering. You're not entitled to share it with anybody else. You're not entitled to use it except pursuant to a contract that we might enter into. He's a marketer, therefore he didn't like much of anything that I suggested because, we're raining on the parade. And his response was completely understandable. They're not going to want to agree to anything. They're going to be put off by seeing even a written disclaimer of this nature. In one of the few instances where I think I came up with a brilliant response, I pointed out to him, look, if your idea isn't valuable enough for them, can't you just say to them, if my idea isn't valuable enough for you to realize that I want to protect it, you shouldn't waste your time talking to me. It actually worked a few times. We went even further. There were a couple of companies that he had bad experience with. So we turned that statement, that unilateral claim of rights and thou shalt nots, turn it into a contract. I'm willing to present my ideas, but you are agreeing that you won't disclose it to anybody else. You won't try to use it except in evaluating my proposal. You recognize and agree that it's copyrighted materials. Interestingly enough, the few times he decided to go that far, he had no trouble getting it signed because they had already seen him in other contexts and stolen some of his ideas and realized that there was value in what he was presenting and it was worth listening to. So there's that level in the practical terms of dealing with professionals like us, dealing with potential customers, whoever it is, and having some protection that you do in effect through a contract, through claims of rights to the materials, unilateral attempts to limit their ability to misuse your works. There's no guarantee that some unscrupulous person will not steal your idea. But at least if we take those steps, we have a basis to go into court to try to get injunctive relief, to discontinue the wrongful conduct. And we have a basis to seek damages if there are any. So that's kind of the legal side of things. Think in terms of contracts, trademarks, the other items that I mentioned, and it gives you a better basis to protect your brilliant idea, to protect your plans, and to be able to talk comfortably with other people about how to market them.
There's a lot of information to unpack there, but it's so critical, though, to the success and viability of an organization, especially when starting out. So thanks for the thorough answer. So I'm going to go back to each of you. I'll start again with Tom. So what's kind of the process that somebody needs to be thinking about before they meet with you and for design? What are some of the check boxes, as we call them, so they're prepared, so they have a reason to meet with you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So again, I'm approaching this from the device world. So I mean, your business might be something other. It might be a system or something, but you can sort of translate that. But from a device world, you have a product or a device. A group like ours, we can help you actually invent it. So we have people that come and say, I see a need, and I think I have an idea for a product that will meet this need, but I don't know how to make it real. I don't know how to turn it into something that's actually going to be commercialized, manufacturable, and actually marketable, and will actually work. So there's a few things that we like people to do early on, and I mentioned one of them earlier is understand the ROI case on it. But I think and we see this in academia a lot. So, at universities, there's people inventing stuff all the time. And they're working on something in their lab, and it's like, oh, this is great. And so they want to launch it into a product. But not everything that's a great discovery, not all of those things are great product ideas. There's a big difference. And so I'll use my example from people who come out of academia and they have something. And so what I ask them to do, one of the biggest things is I ask them to think about who their user is, who's going to be using it. And most of them have, because that's where they get the idea. Most of them have identified a user, and usually it's themselves or somebody they know. And ask, okay, what is the major need that this user has? And they might come up with one, and what I will ask them to do then is, you came up with one need. A user needs to do some major thing, and you've got an idea for a device product that's going to solve that problem. Now I'll send them back with some homework and say, now what you need to do is you need to go back and you need to find out a bunch of the small needs that are surrounding that major need, and come back to me with some of that and tell me, give me 6, 7, 8, 10 other small needs surrounding that one need that are going to make that user get excited about your solution. Because you can have a device that solves one major problem, but so will everyone else. But there's a lot of ancillary things about what's going to get that user excited, like you were talking about. What's going to emotionally connect with that user? What are they thinking emotionally that's going to make them want to do this? What are some of their smaller pain points around it? So I like them to come with a list of those smaller ones, because that's what you want to solve when you're designing the device. And honestly, that's where innovation comes from. Innovation doesn't come from somebody saying, geez, we got surgeons and they're having trouble suturing this heart valve in place, and we need a better way to suture a heart valve in place. Well, that's good if you come up with a better way. But there's a ton of other things that those surgeons are dealing with. And if you can solve all these other problems while you're delivering this core, now you've just met a user's need to a deeper level. That's going to emotionally excite them when you're meeting their needs. So you got to find out what those small needs are, and then attack it from there. And I've always heard too, what you've said is so true. I've always heard the two things that move money are trust and emotion. So this emotion aspect is huge. You have to make an emotional connection. And you don't make an emotional connection only through your pitch. Your product has to make an emotional connection itself with the user. And then you have to be able to build trust that you're going to deliver, your product is going to deliver on all that big need, and it's going to deliver on those ancillary needs. But then the second thing is to take all of that thinking that I just described, and now don't think about necessarily your user. Think about who are the barriers to purchasing, or who the purchaser is going to be. In a medical device, your user might be a physician, but that physician is not the person who's making a purchasing decision. It could be the hospital. Or if it's a patient that's using it, they might not be the person that's purchasing it. So think about who's going to make the buying decision, and think about all those things with that person, and see if you can work those aspects into your device. And then the third step is to take that same thinking and go one step further and think about your exit strategy again. It's like, okay, you think you're going to sell this to some large manufacturer? Apply that thinking to them. What's their pain point? What are their needs as a company surrounding your potential product in their product line? And how is your company and your product and your system, how's it going to meet their needs and emotionally attack them? So it's a lot of homework to give somebody, but you can do a lot of homework on your own, and you can at least get a good idea and figure some of this stuff out just by doing some homework on the front end.
Well, I think even so, you got those people who have great ideas, but maybe they're not so good at how to articulate this great concept. So even bringing other resources together to help tell that story, I think is important too. Yeah. So Rick, from a funding standpoint, what are some of the ducks that they need to be lined up for you to have a conversation and to try to take some action on them?
Sure. So just to take a couple of thoughts on what Tom said, and I'll dovetail that into talking about when to go invest and talk to investors. Tom mentioned there's a discovery process that leads to a product idea, and from an investor's perspective, kind of a line of thinking is it a product or is it a company? So you may have a great idea for a product, but then the next level is the company, and that has to do with the market size and the business model and stuff like that. But ask yourself that question, because that line will be used by investors when the door gets shut. Is it a product or is it a company? And then at Chum's St. Paul group a couple of months ago, one of our speakers used a term that I thought was very good, and it stuck with me: reverse salient. And if you think of in military terms or in sports terms, you have a line moving forward, and there's a weak spot in that line, and that starts to lag everywhere else. So think of it as a tire in a car that starts to balloon out and get a little soft, or a balloon that's soft point. So that soft spot in this line that's moving forward, if you think of a value proposition for a customer set, and a lot of things happen, their reverse salient is where you should focus your ideas and energy on solving that problem, because if you solve that problem, now you make their whole system better, and it's not just a point solution, you now improve their whole value chain. So anyway, a couple of thoughts to dovetail on what Tom thought. Question was talking to investors, and when is that appropriate? Well, there's kind of a short answer, which is today. You're at a lunch, there's people here, you get a chance to tell your story 5, 10, 15 times. Tell the story, because you never know who's gonna be interested in what you're doing. You don't know what their neighbor told them last weekend, or what have you. We got a front page story in the newspaper written on a company a couple of years back, and they got a cold call from a corporate strategic investor that ultimately led to a couple $1 million investment. So you don't know if it's a newspaper article, you don't know if it's a person at your table that you're having lunch with or whatever. Tell your story often. So potentially it's as soon as today. However, the more kind of serious question is, and kind of longer term would be, you want to go through your own capital and get your business as far as you can, because the more value you create, the less dilution you're going to have when you bring in an investor, and then also the lower the risk it's going to be. And so when you reach out to an investor, if you say, hey, I haven't really validated anything, but I'm looking for investors, obviously a huge amount of risk, to I have 10,000 users, I haven't raised any outside capital yet, I got all these needs, I need people, I need marketing, I need legal help, I need all this stuff, but I have 10,000 users. Which company is the investor going to be most interested in? The one with the users. So get as far as you can on your own money, create as much value as you can, because that's going to reduce the risk. And then also put yourself in their shoes. So we're talking about the emotional connection. The emotions of an investor is that they've heard the story 1,000,000 times. Just put a different wrapper on it. I got a widget, I got a new restaurant idea, I got this, I got that, I got a hockey stick curve up and to the right, got the greatest thing since sliced bread, heard it 1,000,000 times. All right, you start to get a little skeptical and you start to get a little tired. And so if you put yourself in their shoes, and then also from an emotional perspective, fear outweighs greed. So if you say, hey, this is going to make 1,000 times your money and you're going to be able to retire next week because this is going to take off so fast. But if you compare that to losing your money, fear carries a lot more weight than the upside. So you have to understand where they're coming from, which then means, back to something I said in the first answer, the risk reward issue is you have to price it appropriately, you have to structure it appropriately, and you have to allow those investors to check the boxes to allow them to minimize their skepticism and the fear and such. And then kind of tying in a couple different things that we've said, 3 ways to get, I guess, the attention or the buy-in from an investor. We've talked about trust multiple times. I wrote that down again. And that, I think, as it relates to this answer, is do what you say you're going to do. If you tell them you're going to send them the deck, send them the deck. If you say you have a budget of for 2020 that's going to do this, and a budget doesn't even have to mean what your revenue is. It could just be milestone based, like we're going to get a certain number of users. Do what you say, because part of the reason that due diligence drags on long is they're making you jump through some hoops to see if you're really going to do what you say you do. So if I met you for the first time 6 months ago and you told me you're going to have 10,000 users by today, I'm going to remember that you told me that, and then I'm going to say, hey, where are you on the user front? Well, I got my first 5. All right, well, big gap there, and now you lost some credibility. So that building that trust comes from getting over the hurdles of doing the things that you said. The emotional connection we've covered a bunch of times, and then the story. Think through the story. And the story, obviously you got to be truthful and authentic, and those things will come out. If you say something you're not, that's not going to work. But I use an analogy or the example. Look at the companies that have won the Minnesota Cup over the last 12 years. Just go out there and look. It's almost like it's a Hollywood script. Now, I'm not saying that those weren't worthy companies. I'm just telling you that there's a strong correlation between getting noticed and having almost a script-like character. So look at how you're positioning your company, the problems you solve, the importance you add to them, and how are you packaging that up from a story. One more list for you. The easy way to think of is friends, family, angels, corporate investors, VCs. That's kind of the easy, low-hanging fruit, kind of obvious. But to get off the beaten path, I've got a list of 8 here. There's a lot of contests and prizes where money's available, like the Minnesota Cup. Crowdfunding, whether you're doing it for equity and or products or marketing perspective, that's a category. Getting money, raising money from your customers, getting people to pre-order things, run a sale, get people to pay early on. That's number 3. Number 4, vendors. A lot of times the vendors are going to benefit from your success, so they might invest or they might give you better terms. Go to your distributors. I worked on a med device project 10, 12 years ago, and we raised many millions of dollars from international distributors who wanted exclusives in their countries. So you can raise money from distributors, government grants and loans, whether it's SBIR or the SBA, that's a category. Specialty finance, you get your equipment finance, your receivables finance, inventory financed, working capital loans. Right now, capital is pretty easy to get, relatively speaking. So the whole specialty finance world is a way to explore raising money. And last but not least, economic development programs. Compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago, where those things weren't really a big deal, they're a big deal. And all I have to do is go up 94, like another 5 or 10 minutes, and you can get money from cities just to plop your business down there and bring 5 or 10 or 20 jobs. And so those are all buckets that you can look to raise money on. So kind of tying it all together, back to where I started, raising money today, I would say you network early and often, and you tell your story to anybody who'll listen, including the person at the grocery store or whatever, because you don't know where that connection is going to lead you. And then lastly, are the dogs eating the dog food? Again, traction facilitates investment capital. Doesn't have to mean revenue, but it has to mean milestones. It has to mean a little bit of a sizzle, and so just get stuff done. Get out there, swing the bat, make some progress, and that will sell your story for you.
And it is now time for me to interrupt because I have to rain on the parade again. Before you do any of those things, again, you need to talk to your friendly attorney advisor, because we've got this little thing called securities laws. Both federal and state have numerous laws related to the raising of money. And they're different. I'm not going to begin to get into it, but there are different rules for when you're dealing with accredited investors, which would be, generally speaking, the commercial sources of venture capital or rich people. And rules, there are exemptions for small amounts and for limited solicitation. But you need to know what those rules are, because the consequences of raising money, the thing doesn't work and the investors are mad. If you violated securities law, you got serious problems above and beyond the dollar amount. Minnesota has what's called the blue sky law. That goes to the other side of securities regulation, which is information, because subject to very limited range of exceptions, information has to be disclosed at a pretty heavy level to satisfy securities law requirements, even if you're exempt from registering your offering, registering your attempt to raise money. I am really sorry. I spoke at a program this morning where I, complicated life for people by talking about some of the things that they needed to be aware of, and I'm doing it again, and that's why, I'm not very popular. But that's why you talk to an attorney early on before you're doing much, and really before you're doing any intentional solicitation for money, so that you're both protecting your idea and you're not inadvertently committing a crime.
All right, so you don't want to put a billboard up on 35W saying, I'm raising money for my company.
Bad
Okay?
idea.
General solicitation, bad idea. You're having lunch with somebody here. Hey, what do? I got this widget. I'm going to save a bunch of lives. And, whatever, my kid had the same disease, and because of that experience in my life, I decided I was going to devote my professional activities to solving this medical device problem. I've solved this problem, and I really feel good about what I'm doing. And they say, gee, cool, that's interesting business. Tell me more. Tell them a little bit more. Now you got a dialogue. Now you got an interaction, and you can lead towards your raising money. Don't put a billboard out on 35W. Bad idea. Do talk to Jim and get your PPM pulled together, of course. With that said, my point was that you don't know where you're going to make that connection. Article in the newspaper did not say we were raising money. It was about the CEO, and it was about the progress we had made. And so what you hope to have happen, just like with your customer set, is you hope that what you're doing attracts some attention and they lean into you. Because if you have to smile and dial after you talk to your attorney to get your PPM pulled together, that's hard. But if the phone's ringing and what you're doing is generating interest in the marketplace, and then that leads towards a discussion, what then leads to, hey, how are you financed? Are you raising money? Then that's a different animal. So I would agree with Jim, and you don't want to have a billboard on 35W. However, telling your story, because it doesn't necessarily mean about investment capital, it might mean that you find an employee, it might mean that you find a distribution partner, it might mean that you are standing next to somebody who can help you move from A to B. You just don't know.
Thanks for bringing up blue laws, because now I'm having flashbacks to my bonds and syndicates, and it's gonna be a headache. Tom.
So I have a question, Rob, for these guys. So it just so happens this morning I was on LinkedIn and I saw a gal who made a second LinkedIn profile, and all it said was her name, and it said raising funds for this endeavor, and then it listed what her medical device endeavor was. Is that the billboard that you're talking about? Is that?
Yeah, that's a billboard.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that. Him for different reasons than me, but yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. Wow.
So,
I thought it was clever.
man, so we'll go
Now,
from,
you could change the conversation kind of easily, saying, I'm looking for partners, I'm looking for employees, I'm looking for folks, a company I've been working with for a couple of years. They've had money kind of off and on as they've raised some money, and they've had different people working for equity. And so when you're trying to move your business forward, again, from A to B, just however you can get it done, and if you don't have a lot of capital, telling your story and kind of dribbling stuff out there is a good thing. And some people might just, because they like what you're doing, the med device speaks to them, they had a family member that had that disease or whatever, and they might say, you know, I know somebody at Medtronic and I can introduce you, and you're like, great. So that person probably could have gotten maybe 3/4 of the way down the road with what they wanted, just with a slightly different message.
so speaking of messages, let's bring some fun back to the conversation, Bob. So from a marketing perspective, when is a good time to start thinking about marketing concept in the process of development?
Oh, well, earlier the better. As we've learned, as everybody I think is here kind of saying too, the story is incredibly important, especially from our perspective. And we deal a lot in medical device as well, which a lot of times product development can start really early in the process. And one of the hardest things, if the first thing we have to do as the marketing agency coming in is kind of change all of the internal mindsets. I mean, these things get names, they get very comfortable with how they're talking about and speaking. They're almost kind of doing their own, let's say, internal positioning. And we go, okay, this is never going to resonate the market. We once launched a product. It was a medical device called Mach 3. Okay, had nothing to do with speed. It was also happens to be a razor blade, but some engineer named this thing that product early on, and there's no changing the filing papers because of it. Big mistake, hugely impacted the potential revenue you get. So to get that internal dialogue, we talk a lot about when we're launching it. We want to create market momentum early on inside the organization. Bigger organization, I think the more important actually it is, even, but small ones too. So if we're thinking about how we're going to be telling our stories, people are we're internalizing what that's going to be. So, and we're building momentum. So when we get to those external markets, we're all going to be in sync. And the other part of that, if we really understand the issue that we're solving, this is a concept that unfortunately we don't get to do it enough, but I'll tell you, I think it's one of the best ways to do it, or to launch a product. If we know the issue we're solving, let's say we're going to be working on developing this product, it's not going to come out for a year, but we can launch the issue into the marketplace, right? Start having that conversation a year in advance. Now, as our product gets closer, we start becoming the authoritative voice, the thought leader relative to this issue. Now, all of a sudden, when our product is ready, we're going to go to launch and we're ready to activate in the marketplace. We can say, well, you probably tried this, you tried this, you tried this. Oh, we now have this solution, and here's why it works. Because we tried all these other solutions. We all know they don't work. Here's the perfect solution. Oh my gosh, that is, in our view, like the ideal, perfect way to launch it. But if you don't start early, that's never going to happen. And a lot of times, and I'll go back in more on the startups on the entrepreneurial side, so often they're not thinking about that in that story, so they're telling it almost too late, or it keeps changing. don't know, maybe, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but if every time you talk to maybe somebody new in their store kind of changes all the time, man, it's hard to, believe them, get traction or anything. So the earlier I think you can do that to create that early on momentum, the better. And if you can launch that issue and own the issue, right? It's all about thought leadership these days and having people talk about it. Man, you're going to be golden then when that product comes out, because it's also a way to kind of validate that this need we're working on has some, marketplace acceptance.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Very much so.
Totally agree with that. Thought leadership is important, especially if the category that you're playing in is significantly large enough that your name isn't going to mean anything. So you can shrink down this bigger market into something a little bit more tangible, be a thought leader there, and own this space of a larger market. So I totally agree with Bob.
Well, yeah, absolutely, because, if people say, oh, we need 1% of this $1 billion market just for that is not a market. Get it down to where you can have 15, 20% of this subsection, and you can show me that, fantastic. Now we got something we can work with. We have an addressable market we can go after, we can message to, we can get to, we can find, all those elements. So absolutely critical in launching.
Excellent. Well, we're up against the clock here, so I want to take a few seconds here. If anybody has any questions, kind of open up to a quick Q&A.
I think it just occurred to me, I see 4 guys who all need to get paid before there's very significant revenues. I mean, how are you guys paid? And if you have if you sporadically might be a proper answer.
All of a sudden it got awkward.
Yeah. So I wonder if you have a comment about how along the process, a new product, what stage it has to be at before, I mean, can all 4 of you guys at some point get somebody from A to D before and let them get some revenue before they go to MNLP? I've lost my alphabet. You know what I mean? LMNOP, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could start. We're a small consulting firm, and we get paid on a time and materials basis. So we're like lawyers, most attorneys, that whatever hour you put in, we have to get paid for, or there's no money coming into the company. So in a lot of cases, we'll look at we'll break it into steps. We'll look at where somebody's going. We have to ask them about their exit strategy, where they're at, what they're trying to achieve. And we can look at first steps and say, okay, for this first little step, this is all the design and engineering, prototyping that you might need to get you to your next milestone. And that's a small slice, it's a small amount of money. Can you raise that money and get that raised, and then we can start development. But if you're asking, how long can we do it for free before it benefits you and you start to raise money, it's none. For me, I've got a team of engineers that I have to feed. So it's time and materials for us.
Yeah, but similar. It's fee for service. We're developing somebody's brand's, product story. We need to be compensated to do that. A lot of times we're going after companies that do have a level of funding. That's why funding is critical, and having a addressable market that you can go so you can get the funds to go and raise it. But then knowing how those are going to, speak for the financial guy, right? But but you need to be able to tell how to spend the money. Now we could help a company go and say, okay, here's an appropriate amount of spend for what you're trying to do, and maybe help articulate that story. But they gotta raise money. We're not, unless it's our product, we're not working for free on it.
Well, Rick kind of hit the nail on the head, I think. For most entrepreneurs, most new ideas, there are informal sources of initial funding, whether it's savings, whether it's the rich uncle, where we aren't sweating securities law issues. But there is an investment required up front, and patent attorneys in particular are notoriously expensive. Lawyers are unfortunately not all that inexpensive. But there's no question, it takes a meaningful chunk of money to take an idea to the point where it can start to be developed and start to be marketed. And professional expertise like these guys is necessary.
I am an outlier. So I do work with companies for equity and or with the understanding that maybe at some point in time I'll get paid. It's case by case basis, but that's part of why I do what I do, and so I kind of like the thrill of the chase, whether or not it makes sense in your particular case or for anybody else's. It's, like I said, kind of a case by case basis.
Great. Time for one more. Anything? Yeah.
This might be for Jim. As Amazon becomes a more and more dominant channel, and we hear stories like Amazon stealing Allbirds or Amazon putting Eveready out of business, what sort of, should people be a little bit more worried about launching on Amazon once they've gone through product dev, and that tends to be the channel, or do you think it's pretty stable, like anything else?
Amazon has a couple of positive features for people who develop a product and are trying to sell it. Kind of have trouble saying that with a straight face. Well, it's not all bad. First of all, it's just plain a good platform to make sales. But there's a feature to Amazon that is proving to be, this is grossly inaccurate, but it kind of gets the point across. It's almost a parallel to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. If you have a federal registered mark, in general terms, Amazon will not let somebody else sell under a similar mark. So they're kind of protecting your mark. So if we don't sell legal services through Amazon yet, but the good Lord only knows what's going to be coming. So, if we're selling, to use the absurd example, legal services under Henningsen and Snoxel through Amazon, well, we did register that name, not because anybody would be stupid enough to combine Snoxel and Henningsen into a name, but because we needed a new attorney to get some practice in registering. But never mind. We have a registered mark. If we then filed that name that we were selling our services under on Amazon, they wouldn't let somebody else come along and under Hen and Snox sell equivalent services. So there's actually a degree of protection for your trade name if you've registered it and now you're selling it through Amazon. It and some of these other platforms are how things get sold more and more. You're going to sign a contract with Amazon that will cause your lawyer to have twitches, but it's a unilateral contract, and if you want to use that platform, you're going to have to follow it. But it's not all bad.
No, I do launch clients there. It was just more the, I get that your name is protected, but when Allbirds went out there, they copied it 100%. And then sold it for half the price, and it created obviously issue for Allbirds. So they didn't take their name, but there was no difference between the two products. So what protections did Allbirds have in that scenario?
Well, it all depends on what they did. If it's a trademark and Amazon stole your trademark, you're going to have a fight with Amazon. If you don't have a registered mark, you're going to have an uphill battle. If it's a product ripoff, a knockoff, certainly you put your product on Amazon and you've expanded the range of people, potential usurpers of your idea. Unfortunately, if you have a successful product, that's happening, right? You're putting it out there and people will try to rip it off. So, is it patented? If it's patentable, hopefully it is. The contract you have with Amazon does provide rights and limitations. Amazon's a tough one to contest because they're big, bad, and they have lots of lawyers who are expensive. It's like everything, you have to be careful and you do your groundwork, you put down your protective strategy in place, and you're balancing the benefit of potentially big sales with the risk of enhanced ability of a third party to steal your stuff.
Hey, just one other thing, John. I'd say, all right, so are you selling a paperclip that has no value add and no brand attachment, and it's kind of, can you sell it for a penny less? If you can compete in that world, then that makes sense. If you have a branded product and this is just one channel and you're building a company, but you have this branded product, then I also think it works because you're building up what ultimately somebody's going to buy is this the value of your mark and the brand and stuff like that. The other thing is, what can Amazon not deliver, which is any customer service, any customer experience. So then how do you, what did Bob, you had remarkable. How do you create a remarkable experience for a customer that allows you to compete with Amazon, because Amazon's not going to deliver that. And then Another way to look at it from a positive perspective, company I'm doing some work with, and 3 years ago-ish, 4 years ago, they were just getting on Amazon. This last selling season for the holidays, they did about 25% of their business on Amazon. Now they have branded products, so it's not a race to the bottom on the price, but it's like a whole nother channel. So I think navigating the Death Star appropriately is probably the answer.
Well, I appreciate the time. I want to thank Bob, Tom, Jim, and Rick for coming on today and sharing their expertise. I want to thank as well SDK CPAs, Ben from Skoll Marketing, and again, Compass Realty with Mike back there, and again, Rob Circuber Jones. Have your calendars marked. February 20th will be our next gathering. I'm really excited. It's going to be for the love of food. It's going to be with Raghavan Iyer, who, if you don't know, he is a James Beard Award-winning chef and author, and he knows his curry, and he has a new restaurant in Maple Grove, Pizza Karma, and one down in Eden Prairie. And we also are going to have Becky from Abundant Kitchen. She has 2 different locations. She does more cooking classes, and she has 2 retail stores. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So please join us again on February 20th. And until then, hopefully we'll warm up. Stay safe tomorrow when the snow flies. And thanks all for coming.